Welcome to the Tech Lab Brief, your daily heartbeat of technology and reminder that your reports of the AI apocalypse have been greatly exaggerated. I'm your host, BK. Let's jump right into it. The Frozen Frontier. Google develops a Frozen V2 custom AI chip that bakes Gemini into silicon. For the past few years, AI companies have largely competed on bigger models and larger GPU clusters. Now they're starting to compete by redesigning the hardware itself. According to reports, Google is developing a new server chip, internally called Frozen 2, that permanently integrates portions of Gemini directly into the silicon instead of executing every operation in software. The goal is dramatically higher inference efficiency and reduced compute costs. So if we just step back there for a moment, Google is yet again going into developing their own computing hardware, but this time they're going to build their chips to have Gemini directly on it. That's ambitious. So immediately my mind goes to wondering what happens when Gemini comes out with a new version, which I guess is hinting, or rather calls back to one of the points that was in the article, that the goal is the chip is only going to integrate portions of Gemini, whatever that means. So I guess whatever portions of Gemini that Google decides to put into their Frozen chip, they would have to make sure it's something that's entirely unique or something that would be carried over into all versions of Gemini. I wonder what that could be. Let's see if there's anything interesting to share in the notes here. Reports are suggesting that this might give 6 to 10 times better efficiency than current chip workloads. So doing this Gemini in the hardware thing would also require less memory to operate, lower power consumption, and which all will result in a higher tokens per watt. So in the amount of watts that we use to run the chips, how many tokens can generate? This is kind of hinting towards a larger trend of AI companies starting to build their own hardware. And we'll just have to see where all that takes us, because this is an ongoing story. And I guess there's an interesting parallel to the next segment, that there's an app explosion. In the past year, the number of new apps has surged as AI-powered coding tools dramatically reduce the cost and expertise required to build software. The number of new releases on Apple's App Store doubled in the first half of 2026 compared to historical averages, hitting nearly 600,000 new apps. So, a lot of apps on the App Store. Building software, building apps is no longer a highly specialized skill. It's commoditized. Software is become a lot cheaper. The cost of writing the software. But let's not forget about the cost of maintaining and updating the software, which I believe is in a class of its own. But going back to the hardware situation, it does feel like these AI companies, these larger frontier tech companies, have more or less tapped out on the value they can provide in the software space. So they're like, okay, let's go into the hardware and really and provide the physical infrastructure, the actual bits and bolts of running software, because, well, the software's got to run somewhere, right? Yeah, this one is a bit of a kind of curveball. Our next segment is going to be a bit of a curveball. I personally just remember this particular AI company coming out in the news and then somewhat vanishing. So I wanted to cover them. I wanted to see what is up with them. And that brings us to the next headline today of the quiet contender, or the state of Mistral AI. 2 years ago, Mistral was the European Open AI. Today, they're carving out a very different identity. Instead of chasing consumer chatbots, Mistral is becoming Europe's AI infrastructure company, focused on enterprises, industrial AI, sovereign AI, and open weight models. Yes, Mistral. You heard of those guys? They've just vanished, or so it seems, because as my research shows, they are actually still doing plenty of stuff. Um, just over the past few weeks, they announced something called RoboStrawl Navigate, its first robotics foundation model, signaling a push into embodied AIs, not embedded, but embodied AIs. And they also released LeanStrawl, which is a continued investment in research-oriented open models. And they have all these other products called Studio, Forge, and Vibe, which I think is actually the name of their chatbot. And overall enterprise tooling than trying to compete with ChatGPT. So I could go into more things that they're doing, but it was covered early in the headline call that they are, being more involved at the enterprise level, the sovereign level, the government, the large companies, and they're working on that, so to say, the AI integration with these larger corporations, which is part of the good work of getting the AI done right in our world. Um, it's hinting towards the reality that we are being an impactful AI-based company is not just developing a new model, is not just increasing efficiency. There's more to it than that. And here at BK Tech Labs, we are still figuring ourselves out too. We have this initiative known as collective and collective intelligence, the end of gatekeeping knowledge, that is still just a high level kind of vague phrase. And yes, we do have our apps that we showcase daily on our briefs, but also what I feel is a strong narrative and a meaningful contribution to this space is the education element, which is why we have our knowledge segments, which is why we're doing these daily briefs. We want to give you that twice a daily heartbeat, the little strain of the brain to try to, you know, keep along with what we're doing here. We want to make our news, what we share to be digestible, but also meaningful. So that was a little bit of a tangent. And it goes to show that a company like Mistral, going back to Mistral, just because they're not so active all the time, just because they're not in the news all the time, doesn't mean that they are not doing anything, I guess. Or rather, the need to dig deeper and actually do our due diligence before making any claims has now become that much more important. And on that note, the state of AI. Stanford has this thing called the AI Index, and it's the annual report card for the entire AI industry. And it reports that technology is moving at AI speeds while governance is moving at government speed. So AI is moving fast. I think that's the takeaway here, right? 88% of organizations now use AI in at least one business function. That's absurd. That's an absurd number given how recent this technology is. 70% have generative AI in production, just up from 33%. So they've more than doubled. Oh, 3 years ago, over 3 years that they've doubled. And consumer adoption reached 53% of global population within 3 years. That's nuts. Let me just repeat that one. Consumer adoption reached 53% of global population within 3 years. Yeah, this technology is really cool. AI is no longer experimental. It's become infrastructure. Reading right out the notes, because it's true. The AI generated notes. AI capabilities are accelerating faster than our institutions can adapt. And that, I think, is a very key point, a very important topic that we need to keep circling back to. And At our tech labs here, we have a team of rather young interns who are all at the college level, and we start talking about policy and politics, and I can see them just the mind and their attention just like shutting off. Like, I don't want to talk about this. This is so boring. And I used to be the same exact way, and in some ways, I still am the same exact way. It can be a bit of a drag to talk about the bits and bolts of this document and what it's saying it should do and whatnot. But you know what? It is as we live life, we become increasingly aware of the need to make sure that the right policies and procedures are in place to protect not just ourselves, but all of us, and also even our, let's say, competitors or our or I'm gonna call them our adversaries, right? The person on the other side of the table, the landlord and the tenant, right? we Rules exist to protect both of us, and there can be misunderstanding. There can be, situations that are unfair for one side or the other. But the better we set the rules and policies in place, the more it can be more cut and clear which way is the right direction to go when there is a miscommunication, which is going to happen, especially in AI, when we have words like hallucination, which has always been a word, but now it's just been a really, really big word. On that note, I want to give special mention to another organization out there that's publishing these AI reports, which we did report on earlier, one Mozilla, State of Open Source AI, which I believe was their first one where they're just focusing on the state of open source AI, while Stanford's AI Index report kind of goes over the entire space. I wish I put down more notes to share, but we are a little bit over on the news segment. And I am somewhat excited to go into today's knowledge segment. On that note, that brings our news brief to an end. And now for our knowledge segment. The knowledge segment today is brought to you by BK Tech Labs, ushering in the era of collective intelligence, bringing an end to the gatekeeping of knowledge. Become a member. Join us today. Help shape the narrative. Also, kind of brought to us today, unsolicited, is one artificial analysis.ai. These guys, these guys do cool stuff. They are to me, I see these guys as somewhat industry leading benchmark specialists. They have their own indexes, right? So we just talked about Stanford's AI index report, right? So Stanford publishes this like once yearly thing where, they talk about the state of AI. But here, these guys, artificial analysis that they have knowledge, they have analyses. What a name! They have analyses on AI at different scales, right? On different units of measure, so to speak, right? So just real quick, right? Uh, this knowledge segment and or whatever. Let's stay here. So just like how we measure distance with inches, we call that a unit of measure, and we measure time with seconds, and how fast this person's going to speak. We use this term called word per minute. In fact, we use that when we use WeChat, hint, hint. Um, AI is measured on a few different scales, and the main ones, as we see, given by an artificial analysis. I mean, this is not an artificial analysis specific thing. This is an AI industry wide, um, shared knowledge that we measure AI by their intelligence level. So how well can they output accurately based on what the user wants, the prompts, right? That is probably one of the most important things that we look for in the AI, but also important is the speed. How quickly can the AI respond? Which at this point, we're pretty good on all this, right? I mean, even with Claude and GPT coming out at 63 tokens per second, we're still pretty we're still pretty satisfied with the rate at which AI talks to us. But probably the most important of all, which counterbalances the intelligence aspect, is cost. How much do you pay for your college education? So Fable is just way up there, right? And costs 2.75 per and what they call intelligence index task, right? How much did they have to pay to do an intelligence index task? So I imagine that if we look at the artificial analysis intelligence index, which is cool, which is artificial analysis's own index that they created, which I believe is a compilation of all of these other benchmarks that they use, right? It incorporates 9 evaluations: GDP Val, AA, AAV2, Tau Cube, Terminal Bench, Sci Code, Humanities Last Exam. This is the one I hear about a lot. GPQA Diamond, Crit PT, Omniscience, AAO. Okay, right. So that's a lot of that's a lot of that's a lot of benchmarks. So on that note, I'm going to lead us into WeChat. WeChat is nice. We like WeChat. It's an AI replaying app. So we have our AI chat conversations. We pop them in here. We can look at them again. We can see what other people have been up to. And this volume has to be lowered. Just a tick. It is nice, soothing music, right? So the question is, well, the prompt is to tell me about the different AI benchmarks that are out there, right? AI benchmarks are standardized tests designed to quantify how well an AI model performs. A specific task, reasoning, coding, or not retrieval, which from the single task could capture intelligence percent perfectly. The industry uses a suite of specialized benchmarks categorized by their focus area. And we'll pause right there by the things that listed out. So general knowledge, there's this thing called MMLU. I think that was one of the first AI benchmark. MMLU was one of the first AI benchmarks out there. And it faced a bit of controversy because in the early days of AIs and LLMs, or 3 years ago, it was very easy. It seemed like the benchmarks were being gamed. It seemed like the AI models were just being trained to just be able to pass the benchmarks, which is kind of cheating. And well, not really. I mean, who knows what is cheating anymore? I mean, it's kids using AI to solve everything. There is this concept that we call overfitting the model, which has to do with when we go do training on the model, and we're just passing in a very specific piece of data that we know every time it's A, you got to say B. It's a very oversimplification of the concept and maybe a bit of a tangent, but that's kind of what came out of when I see MMLU, which is like an OG benchmark. And maybe we could start there too, because it's like those tend to be a good starting point for really digging into the breadth of a topic. GPQA Diamond, here we go. Humanities Last Exam, as we saw. There's SWE Bench Verified, SWE being software engineering, Human Eval, Web Arena, LMSys Chatbot Arena. These guys are another LMSys. These guys are another group that have been pretty frontier in rating AIs. Let's just step back to artificial analysis real quick and see if there's any crossover here. So those basically Humanities Last Exam. Okay, GPQA Diamond was there, and nothing else though. Terminal Bench, but there are other indexes, right? So there's the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index, which is cool, and then there's the Coding Index, right, which includes apparently just Terminal Bench and Sci-Code, and then the Agentic Index, which is GDP and Tau Cube. So I guess these two, Coding Index and Agentic Indexes, are just a subset of everything in the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index. Notice that they call this index version 4.1. So how many times they must have kept iterating on trying to figure out the best way to rank all these models, which who's to say, I mean, even what they have right now, how accurate is it? Your guess is as good as mine. Well, we're figuring it out together, right? Collective intelligence. Shape the narrative. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-da-da-dum, bum, bum, bum. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I just jumped to a random page. I don't want to do that. Let's go back to WeChat and keep reading here. Understanding different benchmark types. Static versus dynamic benchmarks. So remember when I talked about the overfitting thing? The static is more susceptible to overfitting, but there's such a thing as dynamic benchmarks, which is a newer benchmark like SWE-bench verified, which avoids contamination by using real-world GitHub issues or timed window data that did not exist when the model was trained, making the results much more reliable. All right, little aside, because this is such a key point. I'm gonna keep saying it. I'm gonna keep bringing it back up here on the brief because this is so key to how the whole AI thing works. There's two modes that the AI is in: training and inferencing. Training and inferencing. And maybe I need to do my own research into what the current state is. But as far as I know, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, a model can only be in a training or an inferencing state, one or the other, not both, right? So when 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 we talked about the dynamic verified data sets, right? The SWE-bench verified, you would use real world GitHub issues that did not, or timed window data that did not exist when the model was trained, right? So when we run these benchmarks, it only makes sense to run these benchmarks on inferencing models, in models that are in inferencing mode, right? And I had something important to say here, or felt like it was relatively important to make. Mm, I lost it. Oops. But yes, static versus dynamic benchmarks. Yes, actually, it came back. Benchmarks are only for inferencing, but there's a different type of metric that we use when we're in training mode, which is a metric that's very specific to the training data. I believe that term is called loss. Loss. There's more to it. There's maybe more words we'll use around it, but in the most basic word we'll use is loss. How badly did the AI fail to reach the next token properly? Because that's all LLMs are, right? Next token predictor. So it's saying when I give you this token, I'm expecting this token, but also, got to think about all these other tokens that came before. Maybe I'm going too deep there. Capability versus preference evaluation. So there's capability benchmarks, which has a correct answer, measures objective performance on defined tasks. And then there's preference benchmarks, which rely on blind human voting. These measure how helpful or human-like a model feels rather than factual correctness. A model can have a high ELO rating but still hallucinate facts. Interesting. That's literally like comparing subjective versus objectivity. How well a model, objective is easy, it's sort of right or wrong, but subjective is like how well a model can be subjective. Take that for what it is. The benchmark checklist. When viewing scores for a new model, keep these factors in mind to avoid being misled by marketing numbers. Contamination, scoring method, independent evaluation, reasoning zones. Where to find reliable leaderboards? LM Sys Chatbot Arena, Artificial Analysis, Epic AI, LLM Stats. And then there's a link here. It says AI benchmarks are fake. This video is relevant because it explains how models can reward hack coding benchmarks and why data contamination makes public scores unreliable. I think that's kind of what I was hinting towards before about overfitting and being able to cheat these benchmarks. If only there was a better way to measure the goodnesses. I'm not saying good or evil. I'm saying good, like performance, like how smart is the AI? There's a better way. If only there was a better way. And on that note, that brings our knowledge segment to an end. And now, ushering in the Barcade segment. Now, disclaimer. Barcade is still a work in progress, as is WeChat, as is this briefing program, as is this whole company. I mean, but also we could say Apple and Google are also a work in progress, but they're pretty well set in what they're doing. Everything going on here at BK Tech Labs is very early on. And Barcade, I may have been very not so subtly hinting towards Barcade as what could be like a next generation of AI evaluations. But truth be told, we're like nowhere close to that. That said, though, red just made the move of moving its pawn up, and now it's blue's turn, and we gotta make a move. This game is really messed up because we had very, very budget AIs making decisions here. 4.0 Mini, Haiku 4.5, Gemini 2.5 Flash. And, until my promise right now is that by the time this game ends, we will be using the more frontier AIs. And also we will have more features that will showcase as a part of the brief to give us a little bit more insight to how these AIs are doing, but work in progress. If we look at the state of this board right now, because let's just play some chess. Why not? Right? There's a chess game here. Let's play the chess. So let's take I think the bishop going here will be the best move. Yep, it's just a prediction too, because I'm on team red. Oh, why did I do that? Because moving the bishop here sets up it attacks the knight, right? It also sets up this rook to capture the king and then set up to take the rook. Which I mean, that's not the best setup, but I mean, what else can we do here? We have a bishop that can only really move here, or a bishop can move here, I guess. Rook really can't do much. Yeah, we could talk forever. Tic-tac-toe, 3 in a row. Yep, whoever grabs that square wins, and let's win. Connect 4. We like stacking, so we're gonna stack. Checkers. Team blue. I would do that if I was on team blue, right? So this red is then just stuck. We'll submit that. On that note, it brings our barcade segment to an end, which also brings our brief to an end. We hope you enjoyed our stream just as much as we did preparing for it. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you at the next one tomorrow, bright and early at 8 a.m. As always, we'd love to know what you think. Please leave your comments in the chat, and please also consider supporting us as a member. And now, your minutes of Zen. All right. Get home safe. Have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you bright and early tomorrow. Bye now.